Good evening, it's 6:30. I'm going to call to order the March 1st Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. The first item on the, we do have a quorum present. The first item on the agenda is the introduction of City Manager Claire Powell and Economic Development Director Marcielle Samples.
Good evening, Commissioners. It is my pleasure to introduce two team members that we work very closely with. One is a face that you've seen for quite a while, Claire Powell. She became our city manager on January 1st, and I'll let her tell you a little bit more about her background and a few other words. And also, a new face that we have on our team is Marcielle Samples, our new Economic Development Director. She started on January the 5th. So with that, I'll first turn it over to Claire.
Thanks, guys. Hi, my neighbor, Jordan. And all of you, I know you guys also as well, but I wanted to introduce myself because actually we'll probably start doing more events, but because of COVID, I've not been doing, we usually do a big introduce the city manager and everyone comes and has a party and everything, but I've been trying to make the rounds to the boards, and one, thank you guys for your service, obviously, and talk about my commitment to planning. So I do, obviously, you know, you guys are the VIP board of Lewisville, along with 2025. And, you know, for me, my history with planning was I was a lawyer, and my background was, I started in Dallas. My background was in representing the planning department primarily and building inspection. So I was in charge of making sure all the zoning cases, everything you see, that was my job. In fact, my first year, all I did was work on Board of Adjustment. It was highly specialized, but we had that many cases in Dallas that were Board of Adjustment cases. But I quickly realized I was going to limit my career if I just stayed working on Board of Adjustment for my entire life, and so made my way out. But it was actually a planning director in the city of Dallas that got me really excited about planning. I was doing all the legal side, but she saw that I was interested in trying to help out on the business side as well and making, you know, deals work and getting excited about the planning components of things. And so she sent me to my first national conference, the APA conference, and my mind was blown immediately. And I was like, this is way cooler than practicing law. And so I loved being, I came to Lewisville, my first department that I was handed over, pretty much Liz Plaster, our city attorney, just handed me planning and zoning stuff to work on. Was super excited about that, and then I had an opportunity to make the shift to city management. So that background, I was able to move. Donna Barron had promoted me to an assistant city manager position over planning and zoning, as well as many other departments. And then I got the opportunity to apply to become city manager. So that's where I am now. But obviously, one of the big things for council was that the plans that we have are my plans too. I live in this community. My kids go to school in this community. And so there's not a change in direction with regard to plans. It's just full steam ahead and execute the plans. I think under Donna, it really was a development of these plans and coming up with, you know, the financing to be able to make these plans work. And now we've got a whole litany of plans on our plate that we've got to execute. And so that's what the next step is, right? Is getting those plans done, building buildings, building roads, you know, making sure that we've got diverse and thriving neighborhoods and all those types of things. So anyway, I wanted to introduce myself, and if you guys have any questions for me, I'm an open book. You guys know, a lot of you know me, you know I'm an open book. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer, and otherwise I'll just hand it off to Marcielle. She was my first hire, by the way.
Hello, my name is Marcielle Samples, and again, I've been here for a whopping 2 months now. It's been a great 2 months. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. So I too am coming from Dallas. I came from the Dallas City Attorney's Office. I was there for about 10 years. And during my time there, I started in prosecution, and then I went over to general counsel. And for 8 years, I was actually drafting and negotiating economic development contracts and development deals. And then I was also providing legal advice related to different economic development tools. So that's kind of what started my interest in economic development. And so I just realized that I wanted to be more involved and I wanted to be on this side of it. And like Claire said, it's, way cooler than just the legal side. So I'm happy to be here and happy to work hand in hand with Richard and his team and with Claire. And if you all have any questions for me, feel free to ask.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Yes, welcome. Oh, yeah, I had to get out this chair. This chair is too
Bye, thank you.
long. Hi.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is to consider the approval of the minutes of the January 18th, 2022 Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. If there are no additions or corrections, I would like a motion, please.
Move to approve.
Motion by Aram,
Second.
second by Sheila. Sheila? All of a sudden went blank. Vote now. Minutes are approved 7-0. In other business tonight, we have a presentation on the proposed Unified Development Code.
Yes. Good evening, Commissioners. I'm excited to talk to you all about this today. It's been a while since we've touched base on this. We're hopefully getting fairly close to the finish line on what's turned into a 3-year process. So I wanted to give you guys an update. I know not all of you were on Planning and Zoning Commission when we had our first discussions about this. So I'll go over the overview and process that we've gone through, and then I'm going to go through the major changes that we've made kind of by the goal. That's how I framework this, is sort of by our goals. And our goals were to streamline the processes, make Lewisville more bike and pedestrian friendly, make Lewisville more green, make Lewisville more affordable, make compatible development easier with flexibility for infill design, and to clarify and update our engineering standards. And then I'll talk about what our next steps are in this process moving forward, and that will pretty much be it for tonight. So just the key players in this were first our code review committee, and this was a team of city staff from all of our various departments that are involved in the development review process. So that's fire, engineering, public services, parks, planning, building, and permitting. So we provided technical review and input. We also had a technical advisory roundtable, and this was outside professionals in the development industry. So these included architects, engineers, landscape designers, land planners, and developers. They gave us that really crucial industry perspective so that we knew we're kind of moving in a track that would be amenable to all sides. We had community opportunities for input, so this would be any stakeholder, any resident in Lewisville could provide feedback. Unfortunately, due to COVID, we had to move some of those open houses as they were planned to be virtual open houses, which worked out all right. We did still get some good feedback through some online portals. And then we also have our City Council and our Planning and Zoning Commission. We had several joint work sessions where policy direction was provided to staff, and at the end of the day, it will be up to the Planning and Zoning Commission to recommend approval of the new code to the City Council, and the City Council to adopt it. So we went through a repetitive process where we went back and forth with kind of all of our stakeholders a couple of times, and we did this twice. We did this once for our zoning ordinance, and we did this once for what's currently termed our land development regulations, which is also known as our subdivision ordinance. So what we did is we had our code review committee do a diagnostic meeting with the consultants where we identified issues in the code. The consultants went and started drafting what they thought might be good solutions, came back to the code review committee. We took that to the technical advisory roundtable to get the private sector's input on it. Then we went to get City Council and P&Z, their input on it. Then we went back to the technical advisory committee to say what we heard from P&Z and City Council, came back to the consultants to revise, went to the community open house to make sure we're getting the community input correct, and then back to the code review committee. So right now we've gotten legal comments back from our legal review team, and we're working on reconciling all those comments and just making sure everything's correct and to T, and then we'll send those final ordinances out for adoption. So kind of going through what the major changes are. The first is to streamline the development review and variance process. So this is really crucial to make sure that we have a process that's saving the developer time and money, and it's an efficient use of staff and council and planning zoning commission member time. We want to reduce the need for variances to the extent we can, and to make sure that our rules are clear and concise for everyone to follow. So we have provided a unified development code as opposed to having a zoning section here and an engineering section here. So all of our development ordinances will be in one section of the code. It will have general provisions, definitions. It will have the procedure section, which is probably most crucial, especially from a legal standpoint. Then it will have the zoning districts and all of the use regulations. It will have the design and development standards, which includes your landscaping, screening, tree preservation, off-street parking. And then it'll also have all of your public and private improvement, engineering type standards as relates to water, utilities, and all of those things. So there's a lot of people involved with this. And last but not least, our park development regulations, where we collect our park fees and make sure that we're acquiring adequate parkland for the future. So one of the things we've done to make our code just easier and nicer to read is we've moved from lists of uses in each district to a use chart. Which just makes it a little bit more user-friendly. It makes it easier to see what's allowed and what's not allowed. And it also has the parking regulation for that use right there for you. So in this example, if you look at duplexes in our mixed-use zoning districts, they're allowed in the Old Town Mixed Use 1 and the Old Town Mixed Use 2. You can see there's some use-specific standards referenced, so you would go to that article to reference what are those other standards for a duplex that I need to know in these districts, and then there's the parking requirements right there. So the goal here is just to make it easy for people to say, what is my use, is it allowed here, is it not? It should help staff too. We've also updated our review flowcharts and processes. So we've kind of clarified what are the steps, what order do they come in, how is the order of operations, and then what is subject to a 30-day time frame for submittals and reviews. We've also wanted to make sure that we have our action and appeal process very clear. So one of the things we've tried to do is we've tried to delegate some things that council was approving down to the Planning and Zoning Commission, to the Zoning Board of Adjustment, or to staff where it's appropriate. So zoning variances will still go to the Zoning Board of Adjustment, and those will still be appealed to district court. But we've taken the I-35 model, and so staff can now approve a deviation from a non-zoning standard, it's numerical, up to 10%. And then that could be appealed to City Council if someone disagreed with it. If it's above 10%, it would come to the Planning and Zoning Commission, up to 25% for landscaping and up to 60% for all other standards. And so that does mirror the I-35 standards. Now, we're not raising our across-the-board standards to the level of I-35, but we're trying to build in some flexibility because we know moving forward, infill development is what we're going to see more of rather than greenfield development, and it is just more challenging to do. And there are constraints on those sites that are still undeveloped in Lewisville that make them very difficult to develop. So we wanted to add that flexibility, and we have added an appeal process. So any authority that we've delegated down, we've also added an appeal to the City Council since they were the ones previously making that decision. In addition, the city engineer now has authority to basically grant any deviations from our thoroughfare and engineering design standards as he sees fit. Those can still be appealed to City Council, but previously people would ask for a variance to an engineering standard, and it's taken to City Council, who doesn't necessarily have the background in engineering to know if it's a good variance to grant or not, and so they're really relying heavily on the staff's opinion and staff's recommendation. And so this will just streamline the process and make a lot of projects go through the review process sooner, get their permits sooner, and get under development sooner. So we have added another step to the site plan process called the concept plan. This is not going to be required for all projects. It would not be required for a project under 5 acres. We would still grant an exemption for a large lot project that's a single industrial building on a large lot. But basically for a more complicated project that involves multiple lots and pieces, we would want to see a concept plan, which is a less detailed site plan. It's not full civil engineering plans. And what that does is it gives the developer some assurance that what they're doing is going to be allowed before they go through the process of preparing full civil engineering plans. And talking to our technical advisory roundtable, they really liked this idea and they wanted it to be optional for all projects, just so that those developers would have an opportunity to get some kind of approval before they go through full civil plans. So we think that that's going to be a good step and a good change that people can take advantage of. And again, it wouldn't necessarily be required for all projects if people didn't want to do it. So in terms of our goal to make Lewisville more pedestrian and bike friendly, we want to do this because we want to promote equity for all travel modes through provision for pedestrians and bicyclists. We want to do this because it aligns with our complete streets policy that council's adopted and that we're currently updating. And we also want to do this because it was identified as a priority from our small area plan process and from the 2025 update. So what we've done is we've adopted some new street cross sections for residential development that support more multimodal use and street trees. So we have 5-foot sidewalks now instead of 4-foot as a standard, just widening those slightly. We've also provided a 53-foot wide right-of-way option, which what that does is allows for a 6-foot parkway between the street and the sidewalk where trees can be planted. We've moved the utilities that were in the parkway to underneath the street pavement itself so that there's not going to be a conflict with the tree roots. And we worked very, very closely with our fire department, with our engineering team, and with our public services team to design the sections. On a standard 50-foot section, what we've done is we've looked at providing bulb outs at the intersections and then at a 300-foot spacing to provide that opportunity for street trees. And we feel that this is important because more development that we're seeing is tighter, smaller lots based on current market conditions. And this allows us to bring some trees and some greenery in to the neighborhood, which does make it more pedestrian and bike friendly. It also makes it more green, which is one of our other goals. We are shortening block lengths. We have a current maximum block length of 1,800 feet. We're reducing that to 800 feet, but we are allowing a pedestrian pass-through to be provided if the block length is longer. And so what that does is it just allows for the people to still walk or bike around an area, even if it's a bit long of a block otherwise. We're also trying to reduce the number of cul-de-sacs that we see being built with what we're calling a soft ban on cul-de-sacs. They would be allowed as an alternative standard, but they would require pedestrian pass-throughs at the end of the bulb. So again, we still have that walkability and that connection from a pedestrian standpoint. To ensure that these pedestrian paths are safe, wherever you have a sidewalk or a pedestrian way or trail adjacent to commercial, it would be required that the minimum light on that trail is 0.5-foot candles. And we would limit the height of parking lot fixtures to 30 feet, just again to make these areas more conducive to pedestrians. However, since we're adding more light, we also want to balance that with limiting light pollution. So we are requiring the lights to be shielded full cutoff fixtures and maintain no more than 2-foot candle spillover on adjacent residential property. I have to say too, it's not required that the developer put in bollards or light fixtures. If the building lighting itself provides light on the sidewalk, that's adequate. It's just we want to make sure that there's a level of light on the sidewalk for pedestrian safety. We want to make Lewisville more green. We want to do this to implement the 2025 plan. We want to do this to be a more sustainable and healthier community. We want to do this to reduce our energy use, to improve our water quality and our air quality. So we have those revised street sections. We've also provided clarity on what is acceptable for design when you're adjacent to an open space or park to really make that a more central and focal feature within the neighborhood. We've coordinated with the drainage manual update, which is currently ongoing. Two of the biggest changes to our drainage policy are requiring maintenance plans for our detention areas and then also water quality standards referencing the integrated stormwater management systems from NCT COG. And so that is just to allow a little bit more water quality. So things like rain gardens that help address the first 1 inch of rainfall. We're also going to allow the city engineer more flexibility to approve alternative stormwater designs to promote best management practice. And we're also reducing the requirements for enclosing stormwater. What we're really trying to do is promote more natural open management of stormwater where it's appropriate. We've included provisions for electronic vehicle ready design, and a lot of this came from our TAR team. Some of the multifamily developers in particular said they were already doing this. So what the requirement has come out to be that we've drafted is that 5% of parking spaces in parking lots of over 100 spaces have to be EV ready. That does not mean there has to be a charging station at the get-go, but it does mean that at least 5 of those spaces have an allocated spot where the charging station could go, there's conduit in place, and that there's sufficient electric voltage capacity at the site to make that work in the future. We've updated our tree and shrub lists. Only native and adoptive drought-tolerant plants are allowed, although staff can approve alternative tree species if we didn't select something that maybe is a nice native or adaptive plant. We've provided for more flexibility in placement and clustering of trees, and that's for the long-term health of the trees so that they can be planted in a way that makes sense. We've provided a limitation on turf areas for commercial and multi-family developments. Within their landscape buffers, they'd be limited to 50% grass turf. They could use other ground covers, their shrub beds would count towards that. But the idea here is, again, to reduce the water consumption from the turf landscaping. We've reduced the number of trees required for single-family lots because we're finding, especially with our townhome lots, when those trees get 15, 20 years old, we're seeing foundation damage on the townhomes. And so again, that's why we wanted to have a street section that could accommodate the trees and not necessarily require it on smaller lots. We've added additional landscaping requirements for common open space areas and subdivisions, which for the most part has been provided anyway, but we wanted to have a basic standard in there just to fall back on. And then we've, in our irrigation system requirements, referenced that drip and bubbler systems are preferred rather than spray systems where that's appropriate where trees are. For tree preservation, we have made some significant changes to that section. The current tree preservation ordinance exempts any trees within a building pad, a right-of-way, an easement, or a drive aisle. And so for our single-family developments, what we're seeing is basically there's no tree mitigation requirements at all. Pretty much everything ends up being exempt. So what we're saying is for single-family development, we want to see that 35% of the protected inches on the site be preserved or be mitigated. So that is an increase, but hopefully that will encourage developers to consider open spaces that can preserve the existing trees. That could also potentially be the area that might be dedicated as part of the park system to meet the park dedication requirements. And then the mitigation could be found through the planting of trees in their open space areas or on their lots. For multifamily and commercial development, we would protect any trees that are outside of the building footprint. So those trees within the building footprint would still be exempt, but we require mitigation for any trees outside of that. What we're doing to help balance that out for the development side is the size of a protected tree has been increased from 5 inches to 8 inches. And then we're also going to give tree credits. So for each inch you preserve, you get a credit for something that you've removed. We are still prohibiting clear cutting. That has always been prohibited, but we've clarified what the process is for tree removal. It's either through an engineering site plan for a development or a tree removal permit, or possibly even we're adding an underbrush removal permit since that comes up quite frequently, that people just want to clear some of the undergrowth out without necessarily taking down trees, and we don't really have a clear process in place for that. And sometimes it does result in the whole site being cut down, so we want to have a process where we can give them a permit and it's very clear what the expectation is, and then very enforceable should something go awry. So in addition to that, for preserving trees, we will allow additional incentives, such as reduction of up to 25% of the parking requirements. So you'd be allowed to reduce 1 space of required parking for each existing tree that you're saving. And we'd also have staff be able to administratively allow some changes in the building setbacks up to 10 feet to allow tree preservation. So you're not necessarily required to have your building right there. You could move it a little bit if it does help you save a tree. In addition to the 1-to-1 credit for every protected tree you save, if it's a post oak or a blackjack tree, since those are our native trees to the Cross Timbers Forest and they're not trees that you can buy in nursery, you would actually get a 2-inch credit for every inch of post oak or blackjack that's a protected tree that you preserve on site. In addition to helping make Lewisville more green with our parking standards, we are saying that if you park above 110% of our minimum ratio, that's fine, you can do that, but we are going to require just a few more square feet of landscaping within the parking lot for each additional space that you add. I think it's about 7 square feet more of landscaping space in the parking lot for every space you go over 110%. And that's because we really don't want to have these vast expanses of concrete parking lots that we've had in the past. So we wanted to kind of have an incentive to keep the parking ratios reduced. Our next goal, which has come up really more with the Lewisville 2025 update, is to make Lewisville more affordable. But this ties in with a lot of things we previously discussed about and improving quality of life for residents. So one of the items we previously discussed was to reduce the minimum dwelling unit size to 1,000 square feet across our zoning districts. Our current minimum dwelling unit size does vary significantly by zoning district, our single-family zoning districts, let me be specific. And a lot of times it's 1,200 square feet or it's 1,700 square feet. So we wanted to reduce that to 1,000 square feet. And then just the 2 images I've put up here are homes that were, I found these on Zillow, so Aaron can probably correct me if those are inaccurate now. But these were listed on Zillow, and they're 1,100 square foot home and a 1,300 square foot home, and they're listed for $280,000. And that just kind of gives you an idea of where the markets are and how these price points are. In addition, we wanted to allow backyard cottages. We spent quite a bit of time talking about this. So we would allow backyard cottages by right in our larger residential zoning districts up to our R7.5 zoning district. And then we'd allow them with a special use permit in the smaller single-family residential zoning districts. However, there'd be a number of standards that would have to be met, such as the lot coverage would have to be the same as per the zoning district. The property does have to be owner occupied. The owner can either live in the accessory unit or the main unit. The area of the home the area of the accessory unit, the backyard cottage, should not exceed 800 square feet or 50% of the principal home, whichever is greater. The minimum size should be 400 square foot. It does need to be on a permanent location behind the principal building. There are some setback requirements, and we do have a requirement that there's a dedicated off-street parking space that serves that backyard cottage that cannot be tandem with the primary dwelling unit's parking. So that's kind of a large change that we're proposing with this code that would allow property owners to invest in their property and potentially generate a little bit of a rental income, which would make it affordable both for the renter and for the property owner. In addition, we would propose to allow duplexes by right in the R7.5, R6, and R5 zoning districts. They're not currently allowed there today. The idea here is that we'll still meet lot coverage, setbacks, and minimum dwelling unit size based on those zoning districts. So we're looking at 1,000 square feet per unit. And then we still do need to have 3 off-street parking spaces per unit. The big concern with duplexes is we don't want to have the whole front yard be pavement for parking, and we don't want to have the whole front be garages. So the requirement would be that no additional garage doors are allowed to face the street. If it's a single family home that already has a garage door facing the street, that can remain. But the additional garage that must be added, it can't be facing the street. They need to find another way to arrange that. In addition, no additional off-street parking between the principal building and the street. We want to make sure that that's all going back to the rear of the property. But we're hoping that these backyard cottages and allowing for conversion to duplexes allows for some gentle infill density over time and does make some property ownership more affordable for folks.
Yeah, it's definitely needed.
So then our next goal was to make compatible development easier with flexibility for infill design. So a lot of this has to do with the processes that we've adopted and trying to streamline those. And the variance process, changing that to the alternative standards and the administrative modifications. We've also removed some code requirements that have been a little bit challenging. So one of those is we currently have easement utility widths, but then we also have building setbacks from those utility easements, and that can become a little bit complicated and challenging. So we're getting rid of that. What we're doing is we're widening the easement width by 5 feet, but we're cutting off the setback from the building. So overall, that's a net gain of 5 buildable feet to the property owner. And we're also allowing those public utility lines to be placed under pavement. So currently today, they are not allowed to be placed under pavement. So now the property owner has 5 more feet that the building can be on, and then they can pave that easement area and use it as their parking or drive aisle. So it just allows for more intensity of use of an individual site. Another change we're proposing is to allow performance bonds as opposed to a full cash escrow for public improvements. Currently, the process in the city of Lewisville is before you can do any of your private side improvements, you have to put in all of the public improvements first. In lieu of doing that, you can do a full cash escrow for the amount of those public improvements that's deposited with the city and then returned once the project's completed. That basically means that developers paying twice for the public improvements at the start of the project. What's typical in this region is to allow a performance bond where the developer would go to a bonding agency. He would pay a percentage to get a bond. If he defaults and doesn't put in the public improvements, the city would collect it from the bonding agency. So we're proposing to add that into our code as an option for development. Now, for a single family subdivision, obviously those streets just have to get built first. So that's going to stay the same. You build the streets, you put that all in first. But for an infill commercial lot where maybe your public improvements are really just a sidewalk, a meter, and a driveway, for a smaller developer, this makes a big difference in terms of the cash flow during the process. Another thing we wanted to do is to allow front entry garage or rear entry garage by right for our detached lots. Currently, they all require a variance to go to city council. However, those have been approved quite regularly in recent years. If the lot's less than 40 foot wide, we would have some design standards. We said that we've drafted it that the garage can't be more than 5 feet in front of the main home doorway, and that the garage door itself has to have some sort of design standard to it, either windows, some kind of ornamentation, just something to make it a little bit more than a basic garage door. Townhomes, however, would still require a variance to be a front entry product. We have looked at the parking requirements, and we have reduced those for most uses. And so a good example of that is under our current code, a small retail building is required to park 1 parking space per 100 square feet of retail area, which is a lot of parking for retail. And we have historically in Lewisville, and you can see that area, we have expanses of parking that aren't really being utilized. We don't want to force people to do that anymore. And we'd really love it if people could find ways to redevelop those spaces and make them more productive and useful. So we're working to reduce our parking standards, and similarly, we're reducing the restaurant standard from 1.5 spaces per 100 square feet of restaurant to 1 space per 100 square feet of restaurant area. And that's more in line with what surrounding communities are doing, and that's more in line with what market demands are. We've also tried to use that 1 to 300 ratio as frequently as possible, just so that there's easier transition of uses over time in a shopping center or a given site. In addition, we're allowing in a shopping center or a strip mall, we're allowing up to 10% of the inline lease space to be occupied by restaurants without having to provide restaurants up to the restaurant parking ratio. And this just allows, again, for reuse of existing structures to be easier over time. We're allowing a compact car allowance of 10%. So 10% of your required spaces can be smaller and designated for compact cars, provided that they're signed and they're all clustered together. This does reduce the amount of parking land area needed. And then we've also added additions up to a certain size of an existing shopping center. Wouldn't require necessarily a change in the parking. So if your addition doesn't trigger more than a 10% increase in your parking, we're not going to make you add those parking spaces. And the goal here is just to be a little bit more flexible with parking. A lot of times these are minimum standards, and some uses want more than what the minimum standards is, and that's fine, they can do that. If they go above 110%, just a little bit more landscaping would be required. And then our last goal is to clarify and update our engineering standards. So one of those things we wanted to do was improve traffic circulation, and as I mentioned earlier, we wanted to leave more creeks and drainage ways in a natural state. So we've added a provision for elbows when we have 90-degree turns in streets. With on-street parking, it helps the flow work a little bit better. We don't have a provision for that currently, so we're adding that. We've also added standard dedication and maintenance responsibilities for drainage and floodway easements, just to be more clear on those. And then we've updated more technical standards on materials used and types of public infrastructure used, and this really gets into the engineering standards about what kind of pipe that they allow to be built with and those sorts of things. Those haven't really been reviewed since the 80s, so it was good. It's time to look at that. So our next steps is we're finalizing the changes based on the legal review. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take that final text and we're going to send it to our code review committee just to make sure everyone's comfortable with the last little changes that were made. And we're also going to send it to the consultant team for a final proof and for them to do the final formatting. And then our goal is to schedule public hearings and send public notices about these changes in the June and July timeframe. So it's a lot of information, but I'm here if you have any questions. All right.
Guess not. Thank you, Michelle. Okay, the only other item we have is adjournment. May I have a motion, please?
Motion to adjourn.
Motion by Francis.
Second.
Second by Aram. Vote now. Motion passes 7-0. We are adjourned.